Daeho wiped the grease from his hands as he finished repairing the communication panel on level 7 of the Galactic Station. Around him, dozens of alien species moved through the corridors with purpose. The tall, blue-skinned Centaurians walked with their heads held high, their 4 eyes scanning data tablets. The crystalline Andromedans floated past, their transparent bodies shimmering with internal light. Every species on this station was smarter than humans. At least, that's what they all said. He had heard it 1,000 times during his 3 years working here. Humans were slow. Humans were illogical. Humans let emotions cloud their judgment. The Galactic Council had tested every species for cognitive ability, pattern recognition, and problem-solving speed. Humanity had ranked last. Dead last. Out of 47 known intelligent species, humans came in at 47th. Daeho didn't argue with them anymore. What was the point? The numbers spoke for themselves. While other species developed quantum computers within 200 years of discovering electricity, humans had taken over 3,000 years just to achieve basic space travel. When the Centaurians were building solar collectors around their stars, humans were still fighting with swords and arrows. A voice crackled through his earpiece. "Maintenance worker. Report to the Council observation deck immediately." It was a Centaurian voice, clipped and impatient. Daeho sighed and packed his tools. He made his way through the winding corridors of the station, past laboratories where alien scientists worked on projects he couldn't begin to understand, past libraries filled with data crystals containing the knowledge of dozens of civilizations, past everything that reminded him just how far behind humanity really was. The observation deck was crowded when he arrived. Through the massive transparent dome, he could see the stars stretching endlessly in every direction. But everyone was looking at something else. Something new. In the distance, barely visible against the black of space, was a structure. It was massive, easily the size of a small moon, and it glowed with a faint, pulsing light. "What is that?" Daeho whispered to himself. A Centaurian named Vexthar stood at the center of the room, addressing a gathered crowd of scientists and council members. His voice boomed with confidence. "This structure appeared 6 hours ago at coordinates 793 Alpha. Our initial scans confirm it is artificial. It predates any known civilization by at least 10 million years. We are calling it the Lattice." Excited murmurs rippled through the crowd. An Andromedan named Kilma floated forward, her crystalline form pulsing with colors. "The energy readings are extraordinary. If we can understand this technology, it could revolutionize faster than light travel. We could cross the entire galaxy in days instead of months." Vexithar nodded. "The lattice is transmitting signals constantly. Complex patterns of light, radiation, and quantum fluctuations. Our best computational systems are already analyzing the data. We estimate a full translation within 3 months. 3 months. Daeho felt a strange sensation in his chest. Hope? No. That was stupid. He was just a maintenance worker. This was work for the real scientists. The smart species. Still, he couldn't take his eyes off the lattice. There was something about it that felt almost familiar, though he couldn't explain why. Days turned into weeks. Daeho continued his normal duties, but he found himself checking the news feeds constantly. The greatest minds in the galaxy were working on the lattice. Centaurian quantum processors ran billions of calculations per second. Andromedan logic matrices attempted to find patterns in the chaos. The insectoid Klesh used their hive mind to process the data collectively. Every approach, every method, every advanced technique known to the galaxy was being applied. Nothing worked. The signals remained incomprehensible. 3 months passed, then 4, then 5. The excitement on the station turned to frustration, then to confusion. Daeho would overhear conversations in the corridors. "The patterns make no sense," one scientist would say. "There must be a logical structure we're missing." Another would reply, "Perhaps it's not actually artificial after all." After 6 months, Vex's Thar called another assembly on the observation deck. His 4 eyes looked tired, and his usual confidence had faded. "The Council has reached a conclusion," he announced. "Despite our best efforts, the lattice signals appear to be random. We may have been mistaken. This may be a natural phenomenon that only appears artificial due to its regular structure. Like a crystal or a magnetic field pattern." Silence filled the room. No one wanted to admit defeat, but the evidence was clear. If the smartest species in the galaxy couldn't solve it, then it couldn't be solved. Deho felt something twist in his gut. It wasn't right. He couldn't explain why, but something about giving up felt wrong. That evening, he sat alone in his small quarters, staring at his data pad. He had been recording the lattice signals during his shifts. Just out of curiosity. He hadn't told anyone because what would be the point? He was human. He was stupid. What could he possibly see that quantum computers had missed? But still, he looked. He played the signals as audio, converting the electromagnetic patterns into sound waves. It was a useless exercise. Really. Sound in space wasn't real. But humans were audio creatures. They liked to hear things. It helped them think. The sounds were strange. Pulses and waves, rising and falling in irregular patterns. Random, just like everyone said. Except, Deho tilted his head. There was something. Not a pattern exactly, but a rhythm. Like music that didn't quite follow any rules. Like a song from a culture he'd never heard before. He played it again. And again. Each time, he felt more certain. This wasn't random. It was communication. Just not the kind that logical, computational minds would recognize. The next day, Deho made a decision that would change everything. He went to find Hana, a human xenolinguist who worked in the archives section. She was one of only 12 humans on the entire station, and they'd shared meals a few times, bonding over their shared status as the dumb species. Hana's workspace was cramped, filled with tablets and old books, actual paper books that she'd brought from Earth. She looked up in surprise when Deho entered. "I need your help," he said. "I think everyone's been trying to solve the lattice wrong." Hana raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold claim coming from one of us." "I know." He played the converted audio of the lattice signals. Hana listened, her expression shifting from skeptical to curious. She played it again, then closed her eyes and just listened. After the 3rd repetition, she opened her eyes and looked at Deho. "It's not mathematics," she said slowly. "It's art." Deho felt his heart race. "That's what I thought. But I needed someone else to confirm. I wasn't crazy." Working in secret wasn't easy on a space station where everything was monitored. Deho and Hana had to be careful. They used Deho's maintenance clearance to access unused storage rooms and set up a small workspace. They downloaded all the publicly available lattice data onto isolated tablets that weren't connected to the station network. If anyone found out what they were doing, they'd be laughed off the station. Or worse, fired for wasting resources. Hana spent days analyzing the signals using methods that would make any proper scientist cringe. She didn't run algorithms or look for mathematical patterns. Instead, she treated the signals like an ancient text. She looked for repetition not in exact sequences, but in emotional tone. She searched for what linguists called prosody, the musical quality of language that carries meaning beyond words. "Look at this section here," she said to Deho one evening, pointing at a wave pattern on her screen. "This spike appears 17 times throughout the data. But it's not regular. Sometimes it comes after a long, quiet period. Sometimes it interrupts a busy section. If this were a story, I'd say this was emphasis, excitement, or maybe warning." Deho leaned closer. "So, the lattice is trying to tell us something?" "Maybe," Hana said carefully. "Or maybe it's asking us something. The way a teacher asks a student questions to see if they understand. They needed help. The kind of help that other humans could provide." Dae-ho thought of Junho, a sound engineer who maintained the station's audio systems. He was technically a maintenance worker like Dae-ho, but his real passion was music. He'd told Dae-ho once that he'd left Earth specifically to hear what alien music sounded like. When Dae-ho explained what they were doing, Junho's eyes lit up. "You're telling me the entire Galactic Council missed this because they don't understand music? We're not telling you anything for certain," Hana corrected. "We're just exploring a possibility. A stupid possibility," Dae-ho added with a slight smile. "The kind only humans would try." Day. 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 Junho joined them that same night. He brought equipment that could analyze the signals in ways the quantum computers never attempted. He looked for things like syncopation, harmony, and dissonance. He treated the lattice like it was a symphony, written in a language no one had heard before. "This is incredible," Junho said after his first full day of analysis. "There are call and response patterns here. Question and answer structures. It's like the lattice is having a conversation, but no one's been talking back." "What do you mean?" Hana asked. Junho played 2 segments of the signal. "Listen. This part here rises in intensity, then pauses. Waiting. When nothing happens, it repeats with variation. Like someone asking a question, getting silence, then asking again in a different way. It's frustrated. Dae-ho felt a chill run down his spine. The lattice is lonely. They all sat in silence for a moment, letting that idea settle. An ancient structure, 10 million years old, still calling out into the void, still waiting for someone to answer. "We need more people," Hana decided. "Different perspectives. If we're right about this being emotional communication, we need people who understand emotions in different ways." Over the next week, they carefully recruited 3 more humans. Yuna was a child psychologist who worked in the station's family services department. Tae-young was a philosopher who taught ethics classes to young alien students. Minji worked in the entertainment sector, writing and performing stories for the station's diverse population. Each person brought something unique. Yuna analyzed the signals like they were the communication attempts of a child learning to speak. She found what she called seeking behaviors, patterns that reminded her of how babies reach out to their parents, testing to see if anyone is paying attention. Tae-young approached it from a philosophical angle. What if the lattice isn't trying to transmit information at all? What if it's trying to create relationship, connection? The meaning isn't in the signals themselves, but in the act of signaling. Minji saw narrative structure, beginning, middle, and end, conflict, and resolution. "There's a story here," she insisted. "I just don't know what language it's written in." They worked every night after their regular shifts. They were exhausted, running on too little sleep and too much caffeine. But for the first time since coming to the station, they felt like they mattered, like their humanness wasn't a weakness but a different kind of strength. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday night. Junho had been experimenting with responding to the lattice signals, not with data or mathematical proofs, but with music. He'd composed a simple melody and transmitted it toward the lattice using the station's communication array, hiding the transmission in routine maintenance traffic. Nothing happened for 3 days. Then, suddenly, everything changed. Dae-ho was sleeping when his communicator buzzed frantically. It was Junho, his voice shaking with excitement. "Get to the workspace. Now. You need to see this." When Dae-ho arrived, all 6 humans were already there, crowded around Hana's main display. The lattice signals had changed. The chaotic, seemingly random patterns had organized into something more structured. And at the center of the new pattern was Junho's melody, repeated back to them with variations, like the lattice had listened, understood, and was now playing the music back, adding its own interpretation. "It heard us," Yuna whispered. "It actually heard us." "Yuna, we need to tell the council," Tae-young said. Dae-ho shook his head. "They'll take over. They'll shut us down and try to replicate what we did using their methods. We'll lose our chance to actually communicate. Deho. When they ho pontament. But we can't hide this, Hana argued. The lattice is responding. The whole station will notice the signal change. She was right. Within hours, alarms began sounding throughout the station. The lattice had become active in ways it hadn't been before. Energy readings were spiking. The signals were evolving rapidly. Scientists rushed to their stations, trying to understand what had triggered the change. Vexthar called an emergency assembly. His 4 eyes were wide with shock as he addressed the crowd. Somehow, the lattice has begun responding to our presence. We don't know what caused this, but it appears to be attempting active communication. All senior researchers are to focus their efforts on establishing a proper dialogue. Deho stood in the back of the crowd, his heart pounding. He caught Kilma's eye. The Andromedan was one of the few aliens who'd ever been kind to him, asking about his work and treating him like an equal rather than an inferior. She floated closer to him. That transmission signal pattern, she said quietly, her crystalline body pulsing with soft colors. It originated from your maintenance sector. 3 days ago. Deho swallowed hard. We. Tell me honestly, Kilma interrupted. Did you do something? There was no point in lying. Deho nodded. A few of us. We've been studying the signals. We thought maybe everyone was approaching it wrong. So we tried something different. We responded with music instead of mathematics. Kilma was silent for a long moment. Then she made a sound that Deho had learned was Andromedan laughter. Of course it would be humans who figured it out. Everyone else was too smart to try something so illogical. The Council's emergency meetings became daily events. Scientists from every species gathered to analyze the lattice's new behavior. The structure was more active than ever. Its signals growing stronger and more complex with each passing day. Yet despite all their advanced technology, despite quantum computers running endless calculations, the alien researchers couldn't understand what had changed or why. Only the human team knew the truth. And they were running out of time. Before someone discovered their secret. Vexthar's frustration was visible to everyone on the station. His usual composed demeanor cracked during a particularly tense briefing. 3 months ago, this structure was dormant. Now it's practically screaming at us. Something triggered this response, and we need to know what. A Klesh researcher, speaking through the collective voice of its hive, suggested, perhaps the lattice was waiting, testing our patience and observation skills before revealing its true nature. Or perhaps, a Centaurian scientist added, we finally reached the correct computational frequency. Our analysis may have inadvertently matched what the lattice was searching for. Deho stood outside the briefing room, listening through the door. He felt Kilma float up beside him. Her crystalline form pulsed with concerned colors. You need to tell them, she said softly. They won't believe us, Deho replied. Humans solved what they couldn't? They'll say it's coincidence. Or they'll say, we got lucky. Perhaps, Kilma agreed. But the lattice is responding specifically to human communication patterns. Sooner or later, someone will analyze the signals closely enough to notice. Better it comes from you than appears as an embarrassing revelation. That evening, the human team gathered to make a decision. 6 people sat in their cramped workspace, surrounded by monitors displaying the beautiful, chaotic patterns of the lattice's signals. We could just keep going, Junho suggested. Learn everything we can before telling anyone. Yuna shook her head. That's not fair to the rest of the galaxy. If we really have figured something out, they deserve to know. Besides, Taeyang added thoughtfully, we're approaching this from a position of connection, not conquest. If we hide what we've learned, we're no better than the council members who dismissed humanity. Hana looked at Deho. You started this. Deho took a deep breath. He thought about all the times he'd been dismissed, all the casual comments about human stupidity, all the years of feeling less than. Part of him wanted to hold on to this secret, to enjoy being right while everyone else was wrong. But that wasn't who he wanted to be. We tell them, he decided. Tomorrow, we request a formal council audience, and we show them everything. The next day, Vexthar looked annoyed when Daeho's request came through official channels. A human maintenance worker wants council time? This is highly irregular, but Chilma spoke up. Let's hear what he has to say. Perhaps an outside perspective might offer insights. The council chamber was intimidating. 47 species were represented, their leaders seated in a circular arrangement that emphasized equality. Except humans were always given seats in the back corner, barely visible. Today, Daeho stood at the center of the circle with his 5 human colleagues beside him. Vexthar's 4 eyes focused on Daeho with barely concealed impatience. You have 10 minutes. Explain why we should listen to maintenance staff about a scientific matter beyond their comprehension. Quote, Daeho felt his hands shaking, but Hana squeezed his arm encouragingly. He straightened his shoulders and began. 3 months ago, my team began studying the lattice signals, not using computers or logic matrices, but using human methods. We treated the signals like art, like music and poetry and stories. We looked for emotional content instead of mathematical patterns. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. A Centaurian scientist stood. Emotional content? The lattice is a technological structure. Emotions are irrelevant. Are they? Hana stepped forward. 10 weeks ago, we began responding to the lattice. We sent it music, and it answered. Every response you've seen since then, all the increased activity, happened because humans talked to it in a language it understands. The chamber erupted. Voices in dozens of languages overlapped, translators struggling to keep up. Vexthar slammed his hand on the podium. Silence. This is preposterous. You're claiming you solved the lattice by singing to it? Not just singing, Junho explained calmly. We communicated using rhythm, tone, narrative structure. We treated it like a person trying to make contact, not like a puzzle to be solved, Taeyong added. The lattice wasn't designed for species who think purely in logic. It was designed for species who understand the space between logic. The meanings that can't be calculated. Prove it, Vexthar demanded. Prove you're responsible for the lattice's responses. Daeho nodded to Junho, who pulled out a portable transmitter. We can demonstrate. With your permission, we'll send a new signal. Something the lattice hasn't heard before. If we're right, it will respond in a specific, predictable way. The council agreed, though many members looked skeptical. Minji had prepared something special for this moment. She spoke into the transmitter, telling a story. It was a simple tale about a lost traveler searching for home, finding friends along the way. She told it in Korean first, then English, letting the emotional content carry through the pure sound of her voice. Junho added musical accompaniment, creating a soundscape that matched the story's emotional journey. They transmitted the signal toward the lattice. The council chamber fell silent. Everyone watched the monitors, showing the lattice's energy patterns. Nothing happened. Seconds stretched into minutes. Daeho felt sweat on his forehead. What if they were wrong? What if it had all been coincidence? Then the lattice responded. The energy patterns shifted, organizing themselves into a clear structure. The response matched the emotional arc of Minji's story, rising and falling in harmony with the narrative. But more than that, the lattice added something new. It continued the story, expanding on themes Minji had introduced. The lost traveler found not just friends but an entire community. The loneliness transformed into belonging. The council chamber remained silent. But now, it was the silence of shock. Undeniable proof played out on every monitor. The lattice wasn't just responding to humans. It was communicating with them, understanding them. Kielma floated forward, her crystalline form glowing bright with excitement. Do you understand what this means? The lattice was created by a civilization that communicated through emotional and artistic expression. a species that evolved differently from those of us here today. An elderly scholar from a species Deho didn't recognize spoke up, their voice thoughtful. We've been looking at this structure through our own lens. We assumed advanced intelligence meant computational intelligence. But what if that's not the only path? What if the builders of the lattice were advanced in ways we never considered? End quote. We conticu s. H quote. Vexisthar sat down heavily in his seat. All four of his eyes blinked in a sequence that Deho had learned meant deep confusion. But humans tested lowest in cognitive ability. How could they succeed where we failed? Maybe, Deho said quietly, your tests measured the wrong things. We're not faster at calculating or better at logic, but we never lost our connection to music, to stories, to the emotions that make us who we are. We're not smarter than you. We're just different. The council session lasted another 4 hours. The human team demonstrated their methods, explaining how they'd approached the lattice. Researchers took notes frantically. Questions came from every direction. But the tone had changed. No one was dismissing the humans now. No one was laughing at their illogical methods. By the end of the session, the weeks following the council demonstration changed life on the station dramatically. The human team, once relegated to maintenance duties and low-level positions, now occupied the primary research laboratory. Scientists from every species requested meetings with them, eager to learn these new methods of communication. Some came with genuine curiosity. Others came with barely concealed resentment. Deho found himself teaching Centaurian researchers about intuition. It was strange, trying to explain something that felt more like instinct than knowledge. You have to stop trying to solve it. You wasn't stay, and temis, he told a group of frustrated scientists. Start trying to feel it. What emotion does this signal pattern give you? They looked at him like he'd asked them to breathe underwater. Emotions weren't data. Feelings weren't measurable. But slowly, painfully, some of them began to understand. The lattice didn't respond to their calculations. But when a Centaurian researcher hummed a tune from her childhood, the lattice answered with warmth and recognition. Meanwhile, the human team continued their deeper work with the lattice. The structure's responses were becoming more sophisticated, more intentional. Patterns emerged that suggested not just communication, but teaching. The lattice was showing them something, leading them toward a bigger revelation. Hannah spent her days analyzing 3 months' worth of exchanges. She'd printed them out on paper, old-fashioned and inefficient, but it helped her see connections that monitors missed. She spread the papers across the floor of the laboratory, walking between them, looking for the larger narrative. It's a test, she announced one morning, calling everyone together. Look at the progression. The lattice starts with simple emotional exchanges. Joy, sadness, curiosity. Then it moves to more complex ideas. Cooperation, sacrifice, hope, despite uncertainty. It's not just communicating with us. It's evaluating us. Taeyang studied the papers, his philosopher's mind piecing together the implications. A test, for what purpose? What happens if we pass? Or fail? That answer came 2 days later. The lattice sent a transmission unlike any before. It wasn't emotional or artistic. It was visual, projected directly into the station's computer systems, bypassing their security with effortless ease. Images appeared on every screen simultaneously. The first image showed a civilization. Not human, not any known species, but clearly intelligent. They built beautiful cities that seemed to grow rather than be constructed, organic architecture that blended with nature. They created art that moved and breathed. Their entire culture appeared to be built on harmony between logic and emotion, science and art. The second image showed the same civilization, but transformed. They were no longer physical beings, but pure energy. Consciousness, without form. They'd transcended their biological limitations. The third image showed the lattice itself. But thousands of them, scattered throughout the universe. Each one, a gateway, a test, a filter. They're called the Builders, Kilma said softly, translating data that appeared alongside the images. She'd been working with the human team since the beginning, bridging the gap between human intuition and alien technical understanding. They created these lattices millions of years ago, before they evolved beyond physical form, Junho whispered. Why? What are the lattices for? The answer came in the next wave of images. Species after species approached the lattices, but most couldn't understand them. They tried to solve them like puzzles, crack them like codes, conquer them like territory. Only those species that approached with humility, with openness to different forms of intelligence, could pass through. It's not about being smart, Yuna realized. It's about being wise. About recognizing that intelligence isn't just calculation and logic. The final images showed what lay beyond the lattices. Vast networks of energy and knowledge, dimensions humans couldn't properly perceive. Libraries containing the accumulated wisdom of every civilization that had ever existed. Power beyond imagination. But also, responsibility. The Builders hadn't just created a test of intelligence, they'd created a test of character. Only species that could balance technological advancement with emotional wisdom, logic with compassion, power with humility, were ready for what lay beyond. Vexthar stared at the images, his 4 eyes wide. They're offering us access to everything they learned, everything they built. Not offering, Deho corrected gently. Evaluating whether we're ready, whether we deserve it. A message appeared, this time in text that every species could read through their translation systems. It posed a question, but not a simple one. It was a moral paradox about choice and consequence, about the weight of power and the cost of knowledge. The question had no mathematically correct answer, no logical solution that satisfied all variables. The council assembled again, this time in genuine collaboration rather than hierarchy. For 2 days, representatives from every species debated the question. The mathematicians tried to find optimal solutions. The ethicists argued principles and duties. The strategists analyzed outcomes and probabilities. But no answer satisfied everyone. No solution felt right. On the 3rd day, Taeyang stood before the council. We're approaching this wrong, he said. The Builders don't want us to solve this paradox. They want us to face it honestly, to acknowledge that some questions don't have perfect answers. That wisdom sometimes means choosing despite uncertainty, accepting responsibility for consequences we can't fully predict. That's not logical, a Centaurian argued. How can we make important decisions without complete information? Because that's what real life requires, Hana answered. The Builders evolved beyond physical form, but they remembered what it meant to be limited, uncertain, mortal. They're testing whether we can hold power while remembering our limitations, whether we can be strong and humble at the same time. Yuna added, children face this all the time. They make choices without knowing all the outcomes. They trust that making a choice with good intentions is better than being paralyzed by uncertainty. Maybe that's what we need to remember. The council debated for another full day. Finally, they reached a consensus. Not because they'd found a perfect solution, but because they'd agreed to accept imperfection. They would answer the Builders' question by acknowledging that both choices, offered in the paradox, had merit and cost. They would choose based on their values, not their calculations, and they would accept whatever consequences followed. Minji crafted the response carefully, translating their decision into emotional and narrative language the lattice would understand. It was a story about a people learning to trust themselves despite their doubts, about choosing to move forward even when the path wasn't clear. They transmitted the response. The waiting was agonizing. Hours passed in tense silence. Scientists ran simulations, preparing for every possible outcome. Would the lattice accept their answer? Reject it? Ignore them entirely? When the response came, it arrived with a sound that resonated through the entire station. Not an alarm or a warning, but something that felt like music and laughter combined. The lattice began to transform. Its structure unfolded in ways that seemed to violate physics, revealing a gateway that pulsed with invitation. Images flooded their screens again. This time they showed congratulations, welcome, and something else. A warning. The builders showed them a vision of the future. A threat was coming to the galaxy. Something from beyond normal space. Not in the immediate future, but soon enough. 20 years? Perhaps 30. And stopping it would require cooperation between all species, combining different types of intelligence and approaches. The lattice hadn't just been a test. It had been preparation. The builders had scattered these gateways throughout the universe, hoping that when the crisis came, species would be ready, would have learned to work together, would have evolved beyond seeing their own way as the only way. Vexithar approached Deho after the transmission ended. The Centaurian looked different now, humbled and thoughtful. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I spent years dismissing humanity as inferior. I was blind to my own limitations." "We all were," Deho replied. "Humans included. We thought being ranked last meant we had nothing to contribute. But every species brings something unique. The builders understood that. They created a test that no one type of intelligence could pass alone." "So what now?" Vexthar asked. Deho looked at the gateway, pulsing with invitation and promise. "Now we learn. Together. And we prepare for what's coming. Because if the builders went through all this trouble to warn us, whatever's heading our way must be significant." The Council immediately established new protocols. Research teams would be mixed species, combining different approaches. Human methods of emotional intelligence would be taught alongside alien computational techniques. The hierarchies based on intelligence testing were officially dissolved. Different didn't mean lesser, it just meant different. That night, the human team gathered one final time in their cramped workspace. Soon, they'd be moved to proper facilities, given real resources and respect. But tonight, they wanted to remember where it started. "We changed the galaxy," Junho said wonderingly. The gateway hung in space like a wound in reality, pulsing with colors that shouldn't exist. Scientists from every species monitored it constantly, taking readings that made no sense according to known physics. Energy flowed both in and out simultaneously. Time seemed to move differently near its edges. Inside the gateway, they could see glimpses of something vast, something that their instruments couldn't properly measure. The council met in continuous session for 3 days straight, debating the next steps. Everyone wanted to send expeditions through immediately. The Centaurians prepared quantum probes. The Andromedans offered to send energy-based scouts. The Klesh wanted to send a hive mind unit that could process and share information instantaneously. But the Lattice had made one thing clear in its final communications. The gateway would only open for those who understood what the builders had been testing. It required intention, not just action. Approach with conquest in mind, and it would remain closed. Approach with humility and willingness to learn, and it would welcome. Arguments erupted constantly. Some council members wanted humanity to have priority, since they'd been the ones to establish first contact. Others resented this, claiming that once the correct approach had been identified, any species could replicate it. Still, others worried about security. What if sending anyone through the gateway triggered unknown consequences? Deho attended these meetings now, no longer a maintenance worker but an official advisor. It felt surreal, sitting among the leaders of 47 civilizations. But he'd learned something important over the past months. Position didn't equal wisdom. Authority didn't mean understanding. Sometimes the person who saw most clearly was the one everyone had overlooked. On the fourth day of deliberations, Vexthar proposed a solution. We send a joint team, representatives from multiple species, led by humans but including others who've shown they understand the Builder's philosophy. Not a military expedition. Not a conquest. An exploration based on mutual respect and learning. The proposal passed, though not unanimously. Some species still grumbled about humans leading anything. But the mathematics of the situation were undeniable. The gateway responded to human communication in ways it didn't respond to others. Ignoring that fact would be foolish. Choosing the team took another week. Yuna volunteered immediately. If this is about understanding different forms of intelligence, you need someone who specializes in understanding how minds work. That's literally my job. Kilma insisted on joining as well. I've worked with the human team from the beginning. I understand both human intuition and Andromedan technical analysis. You need that bridge. In the end, the team consisted of 12 members. 6 humans, including Yuna, Hana, and Junho. 6 aliens from different species, including Kilma, and surprisingly, Vexthar. I need to see, the Centaurian explained. I need to understand what I missed. What my entire species missed. If the Builders created something this significant, I want to witness it firsthand. I want to witness. The preparation took months. They couldn't just fly through the gateway in a regular ship. The lattice's instructions, translated through layers of emotional and symbolic communication, suggested that physical vessels wouldn't work properly. They needed to approach it more directly, more personally. The solution came from combining human intuition with alien engineering. They created small personal pods, barely larger than a person, that responded to thought and intention rather than manual controls. Each pod was attuned to its occupant's brainwaves. To pilot it, you had to think about where you wanted to go and why. Purpose and destination merged into a single concept. Hana called them intention vehicles. The name stuck. On the day of the expedition, the entire station gathered to watch. The 12 pods launched from the docking bay, moving in formation toward the gateway. Daeho watched from the observation deck, his heart tight with worry. Hana was on that team, so were friends and colleagues he'd grown to trust and admire. The pods approached the gateway slowly. Energy readings spiked. The gateway pulsed brighter, almost as if it was excited. Then, one by one, the pods passed through. For 10 minutes, there was no communication. The monitoring equipment showed nothing. The gateway had swallowed the expedition team completely, and no data was getting back through. People began to panic. Had they made a terrible mistake? Then Yuna's voice crackled through the communication system. Everyone calm down. We're okay. We're more than okay. You need to see this. Video feeds activated, though the images were distorted, strange. The team floated in what looked like an infinite library, except the books were made of light and the shelves extended in directions that shouldn't exist. Information flowed around them like rivers, accessible simply by reaching out and touching it. Kilma's voice, filled with wonder. This is the accumulated knowledge of the Builders. Everything they learned in millions of years of existence. History, science, philosophy, art. It's all here. Vexthar's camera showed geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, mathematical proofs of theorems that no current civilization had even conceived of. The technology here is millennia beyond ours. If we can understand even a fraction of this, it would transform everything. But Hana's camera focused on something else. Beings. Not physical, but present nonetheless. Consciousness without form. Awareness without body. The Builders themselves, or what remained of them. They'd transcended physical existence so completely that they existed now as pure information. Pure thought. They're still here, Hana whispered. They've been watching, waiting for someone to pass their test. They want to teach us. The expedition lasted 6 hours. When the pods finally emerged from the gateway, the team members looked exhausted, but transformed. They'd touched something beyond normal understanding, experienced perspectives that changed how they saw reality. The debriefing took days. Each team member had absorbed different information based on their specialties and species. Yuna had learned about forms of psychology that treated consciousness as a spectrum rather than a binary. Junho had experienced musical theories that incorporated mathematics humans hadn't discovered yet. Chilma had understood energy manipulation techniques that could revolutionize Andromedan technology. But the most important information was the warning they'd all received. The builders showed them the coming threat in detail now. A cascade failure in space-time itself, originating from outside the known universe. It would tear through dimensions, unraveling reality as it spread. It would reach the galaxy in approximately 23 years. No single species could stop it. The most advanced civilization alone would fail. But working together, combining every form of intelligence, every type of approach, there was a chance. That's why the builders had created the lattices. They'd known this threat was coming. They'd prepared a test that would force species to evolve beyond their limitations, to recognize that cooperation trumped competition. The Council received this information with appropriate gravity. The politics and petty disputes that had dominated their meetings suddenly seemed insignificant. They had 2 decades to prepare for an existential threat, 2 decades to learn to truly work together. Humanity's role shifted dramatically. The species once ranked last in intelligence became teachers, showing others how to think emotionally, intuitively, artistically. New academies opened on the station, with human instructors training alien students in creative problem-solving, lateral thinking, and emotional intelligence. But humans were also students. Centaurian mathematicians taught them advanced computational theories. Andromedan engineers showed them energy manipulation. The Klesh shared their collective consciousness techniques. Every species had something to teach, something to learn. Daeho found himself leading one of the new integration programs. He taught mixed species teams how to approach problems from multiple angles simultaneously. Logic and intuition working together, not in opposition. It was hard work. But watching a Centaurian scientist suddenly understand metaphorical thinking, or seeing a human mathematician grasp quantum probability in new ways, made every frustration worthwhile. The gateway remained open, carefully monitored and controlled. Small groups made regular expeditions, always mixed species, always focused on learning rather than exploiting. The builder's library was infinite. There would always be more to discover. 5 years after the first expedition, Vexthar approached Daeho in one of the teaching laboratories. The Centaurian looked older now, his movements slower, but his eyes brighter. "I wanted to thank you," Vexthar said. "You and your species. You showed us something we'd forgotten in our pursuit of pure logic. That intelligence is more than calculation. That wisdom requires both head and heart." Daeho smiled. "We showed each other. Humans alone couldn't have built the ships that brought us here. Couldn't have created the technology that lets us survive in space. We need you as much as you need us." "Perhaps," Vexthar agreed. "But you were willing to try the stupid solution when the smart ones failed. Sometimes, that's exactly what the universe needs." In his quarters that night, Daeho composed a message to Earth. Communications took weeks to reach home, but he wrote regularly, telling his family about the changes happening in the galaxy, about how humanity had gone from dismissed and overlooked to respected and valued. Not because they'd become smarter in traditional ways, but because they'd shown everyone that traditional wasn't the only way. He ended the message with a thought that felt important. We're not the smartest species in the galaxy. We probably never will be. But we might be the wisest, because we never forgot what it meant to be uncertain, emotional, and fallibly human. In the end, that's what saved us. That's what might save everyone. The threat was still coming. 18 years remained. But the galaxy was preparing, learning, growing together. And at the center of that transformation were the species everyone had called stupid, proving that sometimes the greatest intelligence is knowing your limitations and asking for help. We reminded the galaxy of something it had forgotten, Hana corrected. That intelligence is diverse. That wisdom requires both knowledge and humility. Deho smiled, looking at his friends and colleagues. 6 humans who'd been dismissed as stupid had proven that sometimes the greatest insights come from those willing to approach problems differently, to trust intuition alongside logic, to value emotion as much as calculation. The lattice had tested the galaxy and found it wanting, until humanity showed everyone a different way forward. A new research directive was approved. The human team would lead the Lattice Communication Project, with support from scientists across all species. Resources that had been denied to them were suddenly available. Respect that had been withheld was now freely given. As they left the council chamber, Yuna turned to the others. "We just changed everything, didn't we?" "Maybe," Hana said. "Or maybe we just reminded everyone that intelligence comes in many forms, that there's no one right way to understand the universe." Deho looked back at the chamber, where council members were still arguing and discussing. He thought about how close they'd come to giving up, to accepting that humans would always be less than, but they'd tried anyway. They'd been stupid enough to hope, brave enough to try, and humble enough to treat the lattice as an equal rather than a puzzle. Sometimes, being the stupidest species in the galaxy had its advantages. "Are you going to report us?" Deho asked. "Report you?" Kilma pulsed brighter. "I'm going to help you. But quietly. Very quietly. Because if Vexthar finds out humans solved what the entire council couldn't, he'll never forgive the embarrassment. We need to be careful about how this information comes out." Over the next few days, Kilma provided them with better equipment, more secure workspaces, and most importantly, cover. She ran interference with the council, keeping them focused on traditional analysis methods, while the human team continued their unorthodox communication attempts. Each night, they sent new signals to the lattice. Songs, poems, stories told in pure sound. And each time, the lattice responded. The responses became clearer, more purposeful. Patterns emerged that felt less like data and more like conversation. The lattice was teaching them its language, but only because they'd been willing to speak first in theirs. Deho realized something profound during those long nights of work. Intelligence wasn't just about processing speed or logical reasoning. It was about being willing to take risks, to try things that might not work, to communicate even when you weren't sure you'd be understood. It was about being stupid enough to hope. "You're not crazy," Hana said, standing up quickly. "This is communication, but it's narrative-based, emotional. It's like poetry or music. No wonder the computers can't crack it. They're looking for logical proofs when they should be looking for meaning." "So what do we do?" Deho asked. Hana smiled. And for the first time in months, Deho felt something that had almost disappeared from his life. He felt useful. He felt like maybe, just maybe, being human wasn't such a disadvantage after all. "We do what humans do best," Hana said. "We guess. We feel. We try stupid things until something works.